Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Chris Abbott, but all my friends just call me Abbo. And I spent 15 years in youth ministry. I made a lot of mistakes. I learned a lot of cool things. And so what we're gonna do is in this video, we're gonna be specifically talking about how to grow a successful church youth group. And I will share with you some of the do's and don'ts I learned over the years, including the one thing we did inside my youth group that doubled our youth group from 65 to 130 in only 90 days. Coming up. All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome back. Man, first off, let me just say, if you're watching this and you are in youth ministry, my hat is off to you. I was in youth ministry for 15 years. It's still a huge passion of mine, right? Like, I love just seeing the lights go on in young people, right? Seeing teenagers really grab a hold of their faith and just live radically for God throughout their teenage years, right? It's so rare, and I love seeing that. So first off, like, props to you for trying to figure out how to build a successful youth group. I wish I had had some resources like this to be able to grow mine when I was a full-time youth pastor. So what I'm gonna do in this video is I'm literally just gonna kind of give away all my secrets, all the things that I learned when I was in youth ministry, the things that we did wrong, right? And then kind of some of the things we tapped into that we actually did right. And we'll kind of walk you through some of those things that you can actually just kind of steal them and use them at your church, right? To reach a bunch of teenagers for Christ. So let's get started. All right, so one of the most talented youth pastors I have ever met in my entire life is actually my brother-in-law, Channel Trevino. Right? So one of the things that he was tasked with years ago was he had to start a middle school ministry at our church. Our church was growing, and up until that point, we just had one youth group, and it was kind of 7th through 12th grade, and it was pretty successful, right? I think we were probably running 60 or 70 kids at that point, and we were growing. And what happened was they decided to split, and now we're gonna do a high school ministry, 9th through 12th, and then we were launching a JV ministry or a middle school ministry that was 6th, 7th, and 8th. Right? And so if you've been in youth ministry for more than 5 minutes, then you know recruiting for high school is a lot easier than recruiting leaders for middle school. Right? Middle school is a little bit of an awkward age, and it's much harder to get people to volunteer. In fact, when he was doing it, not only did he have to go build an entire team, but he wasn't allowed to poach from the high school team, right? And most people wanted to stay in high school anyway. So he had to go recruit people who had never been youth leaders before, and he had to somehow convince them to come be youth leaders of middle school kids, which is not an easy task, I assure you. In fact, I'm still in awe to this day of the way he did it, right? He's a people person, right? He naturally casts vision. And so instead of asking people if they would be willing to help out in the middle school ministry for 2 hours a week on Wednesday nights, right? Instead, what he did is he actually talked to people one-on-one. He would just say, hey, John, I don't know if you ever thought about it, but man, middle school for me was a really rough time. Right? Like, man, middle school was the first time that someone offered weed, right? It was the first time I drank a beer, right? It was the first time where all my friends were starting to mess around with girls, and a lot of them were starting to have sex, right? It was the first time I went to a party where there were drugs. All these different things were happening in middle school. And man, we're launching a brand new middle school ministry to try to combat that. I have a passion and a heart to be able to help people who are in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade who are going through that and be able to navigate those waters and live for Jesus, right? I want to give them the opportunities that I never had. Man, would you pray about just becoming a middle school leader and maybe just help me out for a couple of months? Think about how powerful that is, right? He led with vision. He led with his why. So what happened is people bought into him as the leader because he shared his why. So they actually didn't buy it, right? Maybe they wrestled with that stuff in middle school, maybe they didn't, but they bought into his why, because people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so they'll buy into the leader before they ever buy into the vision. And that's exactly what he did. He just asked people, and he had lots of one-on-one conversations. And he basically just said a version of that conversation over and over and over again and invited people to pray about it. And then when he came back to him, he just said, hey, man, on Friday night, we're going to open up the JV youth building, and we're going to be playing some basketball. And I've got a bunch of pizzas and sodas. Man, would you come out and just kind of hang out for a little while on Friday? Right? So he wasn't asking them to make a commitment. He wasn't, getting them to dive in. It was just, hey, just come out on Friday night to the youth building. Man, we're just having pizza. We're just going to hang out. And he did that every single Friday night for at least a year, right? And the crazy thing is, it didn't look like a lot of fruit up front. He was opening up the youth building. I'm telling you, I'd see it. There'd be 4, 5, 6 leaders, right? Every Friday night. Nothing crazy. But after 3 months, those 4 or 5 leaders became 6 or 7, and then became 10 or 12, and then 15 to 20. And before you knew it, he had built this massive youth leader team. And so within a couple of years, because he focused on the leaders, he actually grew that JV youth ministry of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders up to 600 and 700 kids every single Wednesday night. I'm telling you, I know that sounds crazy, but I witnessed it with my own eyes. Right? So I actually led worship for the JV youth ministry back at that time, and it was crazy. I would literally look out and there would just be an ocean of middle school kids. It was crazy. Like, and we'd be playing Blessed Be Your Name, right? And rocking out. And these kids are just bouncing, right? Just jumping up and down. And you're like, these are middle school kids just living their best life for Jesus right now and rocking out. And I'm telling you, we'd get done with the worship set and kids would start chanting, one more song, right? It's like a concert. I'm like looking out like, what's going on? And I'd look down, Shano, he'd just go, let's do it, right? Boom, we jump back into another song. People go crazy again. It was a lot of fun. I mean, some of the most fun I've ever had in youth ministry before, right? This massive amount of middle school kids coming out. In fact, we actually had a couple of events where we had over 900 kids, right? Crazy thing about 900 middle school kids is they need 900 rides picking them up. Right? It's not like high school where a lot of them drive. And so literally it was a traffic jam all the way down our street, down another street, and then down the main street, 3 streets that were completely backed up with cars picking up their middle school kids from these events. The reason I tell you that story is because it's important to understand that he didn't try to grow the youth group, he grew the leaders. Really important distinction. Right? If you want to scale and you want to build a successful youth group, don't try to build the attendance, build the leaders. If you can build leaders and you can get them to buy into you and your vision, then what's going to happen is the kids are naturally going to start to show up because now your leaders are doing ministry and it's scalable, right? There's something called Dunbar's number. And in ministry, this is a social psychology principle, right? That lets us know we can only successfully maintain about 150 relationships. And so you could probably successfully pastor a youth group of about 120, 130, maybe 150 kids. But as it gets bigger than that, you have to have a leadership team to empower. So if you start pouring into your leadership team from the beginning, as that continues to grow, it'll continue to scale, and those leaders will be able to do the ministry for the kids, and you are pouring into the leaders. Okay, so before I get to my last couple of tips, man, I want to hear from you, right? Like post in the comments below. I want to know, man, I know firsthand how hard it can be to be a youth pastor and, how much it can feel like you're on an island in youth ministry. So man, let me know, what are some of the things that you're struggling with? What are you trying to get through? What are you trying to navigate right now in your youth group? So post them in the comments below. I promise I'm going to read every single one. And if you have questions, let me know. I'd be happy to answer. Okay, so when I first became a youth pastor for the very first time, I just simply took the same framework that we used to build that middle school ministry, and I used it at the church that I went on staff at. And so all we did was we had a big night once a month, right? So it can be exhausting and quite frankly, really hard trying to get new kids every single week, right? But if you just focus on one Wednesday night a month, then that can be your big night, right? And that's what we called them. We just called them big nights. And so we always did the last Wednesday of every month was our big night, right? And so we made a huge push. We would spend the majority of our resources and our budget for the entire month on that one night. So I used to have, free McDoubles or, free dollar tacos or free McChickens, right? Just get a bunch of food for kids, free pizza. And then we would try to have some type of a fun hook. So it might be a dodgeball tournament. It might be a bonfire. It might be an indoor paintball course, which we actually did one time and that was crazy. But we would have some type of a hook that would make teenagers want to come to church. And then we'd have free food. And then I would come up with some type of a sermon hook, right? So it might be, why do bad things happen to good people? It might be, can we have sex before marriage? It might be, how can a loving God send people to hell, right? I'd come up with some type of a sticky sermon hook, and then I'd print up invite cards and I would hand them out to all the kids and say, hey, hand these out to all your friends and make sure to invite at least 3 people out to our big night, right? And here's the deal. If you're having a dodgeball tournament, a bunch of free cheeseburgers, and you're going to answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people? That's a pretty good time. Most teenagers are going to show up to that, right? And all we did is we just made sure to love those guys well. I would keep a running list in my phone of kids that I met and their names so that I wouldn't forget the next time they came back. I'd write a description of them, right? So I'll be like, man, about 5'6", like scruffy, long hair, and he goes to Sepulpa, right? And then, man, if I saw him the next week or 2 or 3 weeks later, like I look it up and I'd be like, oh, Johnny. I'd be like, Johnny, what's up, man? Like, man, welcome back. It's good to see you, bro. Man, how do wrestling tryouts go, right? Like, man, because I kept all those notes in my phone, right? And all of our leaders did. And so what happens is it allowed us to be able to pour into those kids, and they understood that we actually care about them as people, right? And so that's gonna go a really long way. All right, so here's my last tip. One of the things that we did on these big nights is a lot of times we would use that big night as the kickoff for a new sermon series, right? So we get everybody there and then we just say, hey, make sure you come back next week for blank, right? Or, hey, make sure you come back next week as we continue our brand new series, right? And invite people to come back. So here are a couple of books that are really gonna help with that. The most popular sermon series we ever did, we did it every single fall at back to school every year. And we just had tons and tons of teenagers who would show up every single time. And it was just simply called Brainwashed. Does God really exist, or are we all just brainwashed? And I would print up invite cards that literally had a logo for it, and I put that on the front. And then on the back, I just had, right, the name of our church, where we were located, and then I just had the different questions we were gonna be answering during the Brainwash series. Like, why do bad things happen to good people? You know, how can a loving God send people to hell? Is Christianity a straitjacket? Has science disproven the existence of God, right? Some of the big questions that a lot of people have, right? Not just teenagers, everybody has those. But by adding those in there and letting people know we were gonna be tackling those questions, what happened is it created a buzz, and a lot of teenagers wanted to show up. A couple of great resources that you can use to create sticky sermon series like this that are gonna get teenagers to wanna show up, right? Even if you don't have free food in a dodgeball tournament. My favorite is The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. Right? So I literally just took different chapters out of that book, and each chapter became sermon in my 6-week sermon series. Some other great ones are The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, The Christian Atheist by Craig Rochelle, Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace, The Search for Significance by Robert McGee, and I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek. Right? All great books, all have the answers to great questions that can make sticky sermon series that are gonna make teenagers wanna show up every single Wednesday, and they're not gonna wanna miss a single service because they don't wanna miss the question you're gonna answer next week. All right, so in this video, we've been talking about how to grow a successful church youth group, but I know that since you're the youth pastor, you probably wear multiple hats, right? And if part of what you're doing is social media and you're trying to attract new Sunday morning visitors in addition to growing your youth group, we actually have a free video training for you. Just go over to churchgrowthagency.com or click on the link in the description below, and we have a training on exactly how you can use social media to grow your church. We'll see you soon.